Chapter 10. Labor the 10th. How Hercules destroyed the monster Mammon and his whole herd. It has been said that Christianity overthrew the worship of demons. It was some time in doing so, however, for, to say nothing of the devil Moloch, or war, whose destruction by Hercules we have already commemorated, the devil Mammon, so late as the middle of the 19th century, was adored throughout the world, but especially in Great Britain. To Mammon, as well as to Moloch, were sacrificed human victims, and the larger share of them, perhaps, was immolated to the former fiend. They were deprived of life, not by the summary processes of throat-cutting, shooting, and stabbing, amid fire and smoke, and the thunder of cannon, and the roll of drums, and the braying of trumpets, but by the slow and silent operation of disease, wretchedness, and hunger. Thus, though Moloch, of the two devils, could boast of the finer festivals, the more exquisite banquet of agony was spread for Mammon. Demons were fond of inhabiting the human body. Mammon was frequently to be seen incarnate, and he assumed various forms. Sometimes he appeared in the shape of a lean withered old man, but more generally in that of a round bloated monster, with a big belly. His cheeks were fat, his chin pendulous, and pimples of carbuncular appearance garnished the end of his nose. His eyes were dull and leaden, and the line of his mouth was that of a smile reversed, so that he had a peculiarly forbidding look. He most commonly wore an ample blue coat with brazen buttons, a waistcoat of black or buff, with a white neckcloth and shirt frill, and loosely made trousers of drab, together with gaiters of the same. Oftentimes was his hair powdered, and not unfrequently was he to be seen with a pair of pocket spectacles depending from his neck by a black ribbon. He seemed, as it were, somewhat knock-kneed, and he usually carried his hands in his breeches pockets. Beast as he looked, and devil as he was, people were very civil to him wherever he went, for he did not show his tail, his square-toed shoes concealed his hoof, and he bore the semblance of a respectable man. Mammon had a herd of slaves, who mostly looked very much like himself. They did him service as priests, selling him their own souls, and providing his altar with daily victims, of whose necessity they took advantage to work them to death. Various were the scenes of this butchery, but the principal of them were the loom and the mine, which latter was very appropriate, demons being subterraneous in their habits, often in mephitic vapor, or the Tartarian atmosphere of a fire damp. Would the foul fiend hover over his victims in the crannies of the coal pit, and regale his malignant eyes with their pale, wan looks, their haggard features, and distorted limbs, and his fell ears with their groans, and sighs, and struggling breath. Often, also, in the close, crowded, and unwholesome factory would he revel in a like treat, further gratified, in either situation, by the swearing, cursing, ill words, filth, ruffianism, and profligacy, engendered by the circumstances of their lot, among the wretches on whose blood he battened. Another of his favorite haunts was the workhouse, where he glutted himself on the deathbed of the unfriended pauper, worn out by the oppression of his murderous ministers, and on the surrounding fatuity, despair, and anguish of heart, entailed by unpitying avarice upon the poor. Or he would betake himself to the jail, and there exult in the tears of the captives, lost to themselves and to the world forever through crime, to which penury, the infliction of their taskmasters, had goaded them. Mammon, furthermore, played into the hands of Moloch. Hunger for gold was accompanied with thirst for blood. He stirred up the nations to war, and his crowning triumph was the slaughter of the unhappy Chinese for the price of poison. Perjury, swindling, iniquitous monopoly, and tyrannous legislation were also among the works of Mammon. For him the politician turned his coat, for him was the heart of beauty self-bartered, or crushed by a compulsory sale to the dotard or the villain. At his bidding did the preachers of a religion which bade the forgiveness of debts, distrain for tithes. Gambling, with its deadly fruit of madness and suicide, was an upas of his growing. The manifold murders of this fiend Mammon and his herd considered, he may be well said to have resembled the monster Geryon, the son of Chrysor or Gold Sword, king of Erythia, whose oxen devoured human flesh. The herd, too, of Mammon, were like unto oxen, seeing that they were, for the most part, very fat, and also extremely stupid. And of odd noble, or refined, or beautiful, of patriotism, virtue, of poetry, music, or the arts they had about as much an idea as the ox. Indeed, they bore an instinctive aversion to all persons who were eminent in those respects. and were never more happy than to see an enthusiast or a man of genius, at whom they were very fond of sneering, in distress. A crowned king, who was one of them, said, he could not talk English, IV Beebles. Will be poets, they must sdarve. The 10th labor of Hercules was to destroy Mammon, as he had formerly served Geryon, whom the monster resembled. He effected this business by a process which probably would never have been divined had the wisest heads in the United Kingdom been laid together for that purpose. There was a body of men who were principally distinguished by wearing black clothes and white neckcloths. It was their business to instruct the people in certain mysteries, and also in certain matters of conduct. Their doctrine formed a system which was said to be established in the land, and which everybody, particularly the gentlemen in black, professed to believe and to be guided by. People made this profession, no doubt, with great sincerity, but they were slightly mistaken. The truth was, that they disbelieved, for the most part, in the whole matter, and, what was very singular, without knowing it. For when Hercules charged them with incredulity, they were very angry, and asked him what he meant, and how he durst accuse a whole nation, with so many respectable persons in it, of downright hypocrisy. Did he not know where they went on Sundays? I do, said Hercules, I see your carriages at the doors. They did not like this answer at all, and would have called Hercules, as they had done others who had talked similarly to them before, various hard names, but they stood in awe of his club. Then the hero went on to ask them whether one of the maxims which they acknowledged was not that, the love of money is the root of all evil. Certainly, they said, they believed it, and were ready to swear it. I think, said Hercules, you had better swear not at all, at which remark they appeared not a little confounded. Come, then, proceeded Hercules, I will not ask you to sell all your effects, and give the proceeds to the starving weavers, but suppose, now, that you devote a tithe of your possessions, each of you, to the poor. They demurred unanimously to this proposal, and when Hercules politely pressed them to allow him to ease them of this guilty burden of gold, they saw neither the reasonableness nor the joke of what he said. They could not, however, help their eyes being slightly opened to their inconsistency, whereon the hero left them to meditate at their leisure. In the meantime, he addressed himself to the sable gentleman, among whom he shot a few of his sharpest arrows, which they all cried out against as arrows of persecution. The arrows were aimed with great precision at that part of the encephalon denominated the organ of conscientiousness, which they stung into such activity, that the gentlemen at length began seriously to practice what they preached. The consequence was, such is the force of example, that, after a while, the nation came round to their way of thinking, and that 1,000 and odd years after its introduction into Britain, Christianity became the English creed, the worship of Mammon was abolished, his herd scattered and destroyed, and himself sent unto his own place. Chapter 11. Labor the 11th. How Hercules obtained the golden fruit from the Hesperides. The word, Hesperides, means western maids. The Hesperides of classical antiquity were in possession of a certain little freehold, which was called their garden. Where it was situate is a point on which the learned differ. Apollodorus places it in the country of the Hyperboreans, that is to say, in the region beyond the north, whereby he proves himself a very poetically minded person, by quietly giving to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. For we take it, that, beyond the North Pole, the John O'Groats house of this terraqueous globe, there is nothing to be found but atmosphere. In the North Pole itself, there is every reason to believe, is all nei, which may be interpreted, all snow, or, nothing at all. According to the Cockney or classical predilections of our readers, Hesiod transports the Hesperides beyond the seas, but he does not say for how long, nor to what place. Their residence, according to the more prevalent opinion, was near Mount Atlas, in Africa. They were said to be the children of night, very probably because they were dark, as, on the supposition that they were Moorish maids, no doubt they would have been. In one of those poetical gems whose coruscations illumine the infant mind, a question is put to a young lady of the name of Mary, as to the nature of her horticultural produce. Had the reply been that it principally consisted of golden pippins, the only bump in the inquirer's head that would have been called into action, would have been that of alimentiveness. But had it also been that those pip-pins were really and bona fide apples of gold, the answer would have rather appealed to marvelousness. and in case it had not been voted a great lie, would have aroused acquisitiveness also. Eurystheus, it would seem, must have acted under these organs, for the 11th task which he imposed upon Hercules was, to rob the orchard of the Hesperides. The placed steel traps and spring guns had not as yet been invented, was guarded by a terrible dragon, to which Hercules proved himself a street. George, he slew the monster and stole the apples. Another account states that he got Atlas, of that ilk, to commit the theft, and did him afterwards out of the booty. But since, in the same narration, it is averred, that, while Atlas was doing the larceny, Hercules supported the heavens for him on his shoulders, this story must be regarded as being, in every sense of the phrase, an instance of what is called in the vernacular, coming it strong. The English Hesperides included other Western people besides Western maids. They mostly resided in a part of the West which was commonly called the West End. They were known by various denominations, whereof the principal were the exclusive circles, and the elite of ton. Their gardens were chiefly spring gardens, and May Fair, but they had also other gardens of broad acres in many a district of fair England. The fruit of these gardens was golden, that is, it was the fruit of gold. Some of it was good to eat, and very good, consisting, indeed, of fish, flesh, and fowl of the best. A good deal of it, too, was drinkable, true, aurum potable, in the species of wines and liqueurs, which, could the ancients have tasted them, would have made them think decidedly small beer of Falernian. In short, it included all the luxuries and comforts of this life, in as far as they were procurable by money. The exclusiveness of these gardens was maintained by a variety of ingenious devices, and was practically enforced, not by a dragon, but by a degraded sort of human creaturish, who bore externally a great resemblance to the monkey race, and were fantastically arrayed in garments of divers colors, red, and yellow, and green, and blue. Their attire displayed a great profusion of gold and silver hatbands, buttons, buckles, shoulder knots, and other decorations of the badge class, seemingly intended as marks of ignominy, which appearance was strengthened by the circumstance that their heads were besmeared with a mixture of an unctuous substance, called pomatum, with a white dust or powder. It was much in this way that a man was wont to disfigure his person when he played the fool or Merry Andrew on the stage. However, these fellows were absolutely proud of their shame, and they were constantly to be seen. The very picture of vanity and conceit, standing at the portals of the exclusive HERCULES, to prevent the entrance of all those who were not, in the language of the person's sons so called, who thought it finer than English, of the gens comme il faut, to obtain the golden fruit of the Hesperides, for the benefit of the public in general, was the endeavor and the work of Hercules. He was wont to repair, of a fine afternoon in June and July, to a place of public resort, nigh unto the region of that people, which was denominated, without any allusion, as some fable, to apples brought in row. There would he contemplate the Hesperides, displaying the fruit, and arrayed in the flowers of their gardens, to the great irrigation of the mouth, and excitement of the envy of penury and want, who, regarding the raree show with eager eyes, cursed their own ill destiny, and coveted their neighbors' goods. Now Hercules did not approve of this infringement of the Decalogue, but he allowed that much indulgence was to be granted to a hungry belly and tattered back. He considered, also, that a rather more general distribution of the Hesperidian fruit, if it could be peaceably effected, would be desirable. For he could not but see that there was a superfluity of it in the hands of its possessors, which, as though not knowing what to do with it, they, as it were, threw away to the dogs, and principally to an alien pack of hounds, whose only recommendation was that their yelping was musical unto their ears. Our hero had a discerning eye and a taste for beauty, and he could not but gaze with much admiration on the fineness of form, grace of manner, and happy placidity of countenance, which the feeding on their golden fruit had, for the most part, conferred on the Hesperides. Nor did he not regale his sight by contemplating the flowery luxuriance wherewith their persons were decorated. But he considered that, had he still been immortal, and had he not known of a world where the souls of the heroes repose among the happy immortals, in proportion as his spirit would have been elated, and his hopes encouraged by the sight of human nature in its brightest guise, so would his aspirations have been checked, and his heart chilled by the contemplation thereof, shrouded in the rags, and defaced by the squalor and coarseness and degradation, of poverty. He felt that, as the high-born, lofty-aired, gentle-seeming maiden, would have appeared but a little lower than the angels, even so would the she-savage of St. Giles's have seemed but dubiously above the brute. He reflected that the costermonger and the cabman would have well-nigh put him from his faith in humanity, and in divinity, too, that he would have been tempted to question if man, capable of such abasement, could possibly have a soul to be saved. He wished, therefore, to communicate in some measure to ordinary mortals the advantages enjoyed by the fortunate Hesperides. Some say that he commenced his labor to this end, by sending Apollo and the Graces abroad among the people to cultivate and tutor their minds and to inspire them with a longing after the Hesperidean fruit. But the truth is, that he stalked forth himself in the character of the schoolmaster, diffusing knowledge and refinement, and taste, throughout the land, and using his club as a rod wherewith to chastise ignorance, and rudeness and vulgarity. Hereby he annihilated several sorts and conditions of men really deserving the title of the lower classes, by reason of their brutishness and folly. And now men's eyes began to be opened. Rank and title, by their very possessors, were regarded as humbug, and respect was entertained only for real worth. A general appetite for the Hesperidean fruit had been created, and all that now remained to be done was to procure a due distribution of it throughout society. Hercules might have broken into the gardens at once, and with the strong hand have stolen, taken, and carried away the golden fruit, but he did no such thing. He merely procured for their owners the liberty to sell them, or to bequeath them to whomsoever they pleased, a boon which they themselves thankfully accepted at the hands of the legislature, their attempt still to maintain their supremacy over the ascending many having plunged them deeply in debt. Thus were their gardens with the fruit of them gradually portioned out among the nation. In a short time the village dance beneath the hawthorn was as graceful, if not so showy, as an Almack's ball, the benefit club as gentlemanlike an affair as the Travellers, or the Carlton. The English language was everywhere spoken and pronounced in its purity. Business was transacted over the counter with as much propriety of manner as at the home office. The milliner took tea with the Duchess, the Earl walked arm in arm with his tailor. Every one respected, and nobody cringed to his fellow. And the maxim, honor all men, was at length universally observed. Chapter 12. Labor the 12th. How Hercules triumphed over the English Pluto and Cerberus, his last great work. Between the son of Jupiter and Alcmena, and the hero who presides over these pages, there is in certain particulars a very strong resemblance. Punch, like Hercules, settles everything with his club, and if he does not destroy reptiles and beasts of prey, he knocks bailiffs, constables, churchwardens, and other monsters of that class, daily on the head. Punch, moreover, triumphs over Jack Ketch, as also did Hercules, and his concluding achievement is a victory over the enemy of man. How far in this respect he and Hercules are analogous, the reader will learn ere he is 10 minutes older. There was once a Tartarus in England. A Tartarus it truly was, although in one very material particular it differed from the place where the lawyers are. It was not the habitation of Dives, but of Lazarus. It was the place of punishment for the poor. The place of punishment for the poor. Why, cries the reader, what a set of heartless, cruel, impious miscreants our forefathers must have been. Whether they were or not, such a place had they established in the land, and the name thereof was the Union Workhouse. How, it will be asked, came this great national crime to be perpetrated in the face of heaven? There had sprung up in England a sect of wiseacres who were called political economists. Economist is often used as a mild synonym for miser, and these persons were in fact political misers. The great question with them was how to maintain the poor at the least possible expense. Not to keep them at all would have been the plan most to their taste, but experience had proved that people, when starving to death, are apt to become unruly, to demolish houses, burn hayricks, cut throats, and do other mischief, and the political economists had a high regard for their own goods and carcasses. To legalize the murder of the unfortunate paupers may be supposed to have been a measure which naturally occurred to their minds. But it would have been difficult to draw the line exactly between rich and poor, and to fix the property qualification at which life should be entitled to protection. For this reason, probably, this scheme was never put into practice, but so far was it approximated to. That every possible temptation was held out to the needy mother to destroy her offspring, which, if she did, the act was followed by this useful consequence, that she herself was hanged, the population thus being reduced by 2. The discouragement of vaccination amongst the inferior classes would also perhaps have been tried by these humane system mongers, but the disease is no respecter of persons. There was no help but to keep body and soul together. And barely to do this and no more was the principle of political economy. But further, it was an object of that science to prevent poverty, to deter people from getting poor, for its professors quietly assumed that a man's indigence was owing to his own fault. The corollary of this proposition was, that nobody had any business to be born necessitous, or weak in mind and body, or to fall sick, or break his leg, or lose his eyesight, or labor under any natural disadvantage, or meet with any accident which might hinder him from getting his bread. That all such things, which the ignorance of mankind had before regarded as misfortunes, were crimes and vices, deliberately committed by an abuse of free will. This dogma would, in these millennial times, undoubtedly qualify its propounder for bedlam, but our ancestors had a great many notions, and did a great many things, which we should now attribute to insanity. It is difficult, when we look at an old picture of a state procession or a Lord Mayor's show, not to conclude that the actors in such exhibitions were not deranged. This, however, is a wide digression, for your turtle eaters and beef eaters were anything but German to the workhouse. In order to effect the very benevolent object of preventing poverty, the political economists hatched a certain enactment, which was called the New Poor Law. The Old Poor Law, we do not mean the statute law, but a law much older than that, a law then upwards of 1800 years standing, bade, that if one's brother man were hungry, he should feed him, and if thirsty, that he should give him drink. And the food and drink were to be what he would cater for himself, his self-love being the measure of that which he was to bear to his neighbor. Water gruel, therefore, for instance, was not exactly the sort of aliment which Christian charity would have prescribed to want, at. It entered not into the dietary of the Old Poor Law, but it was a staple article in that of the New. Moreover, it was very strong of the water. The remainder of the bill of fare was of nearly similar quality, the whole of it constituting a coarser kind of food than that used by human beings in general. For the political economists very sagaciously divined that rather than be reduced to live on the coarser kind of food, a man would strain every nerve. They also wisely perceived that the said food had the recommendation of being cheap as well as nasty. But this was not all. The board provided by the Sa-Maritans of the New Poor Law for the distressed was admirably matched by the lodging. The Union workhouse was made to look externally as much like a jail as possible, and its interior arrangements were just such as were calculated for the accommodation of the rogue. It had dungeons for turbulent maturity, and whips for obstreperous youth. Thus it was very judiciously rendered just the sort of place that nobody who had the least notion of comfort would choose to live in. Its incommodiousness was enhanced, too, by several very ingenious expedients. For example, was any wretched inmate detected indulging in the solace of a morsel of tobacco, he was instantly deprived of the luxury. Nor was the benevolence of the friendly visitor permitted to sweeten the cup of misery with a lump of sugar. But the masterpiece of cleverness in the workhouse system was the separation of husband from wife. For nothing would have tended more to lighten their affliction than mutual sympathy, and this would have been anything but desirable. And the bitter tears, perchance, of an aged, fond couple, now for the first time separated since the days of their youth, were a highly instructive example to the beholder. It must be added, that the persons confined, for confined they were in the workhouse, were obliged to have their heads cropped, and to wear a dress of shame, for the more forcible impression of others with the dread of coming to their condition. Such was the English Tartarus. Its Pluto was the minister who presided over it for the time being, and its Cerberus, the triple-headed monster in which was vested the Poor Law Commission. Nor must we omit to mention a great fat, ill-favored, surly-looking, red-nosed whelp, his offspring, namely, the beetle. As Hercules of old dragged Cerberus from his den, so did he, by main force, drag the Cerberus of England, in spite of his barking and biting, into the light of day. He revealed the secrets of the prison house, he thundered them into the ears of the nation. Nor did he relax his exertions till his shout, "Down with the inhuman poor law!" was re-echoed from John O'Groat's house to the land's end. The cruel enactment was repealed, mercy was at length shown to the naked and hungry, and from that instant, to the shame and confusion of the political economists, the nation began to prosper. The gift to the poor proved to be a profitable loan. Hercules had now performed his second set of 12 labors, but he determined to do a baker's dozen. His last achievement was labor the 13th, concerning which we shall be brief. Hercules, by way of a finish to his great actions, paid the national debt. This tremendous task he effected, by persuading the proprietors of Punch generously to devote 1/10 of their returns to that truly patriotic purpose. The success of Hercules's labors rendered England an example to the world, and very happily the world took it, hence the universal peace and happiness in the midst of which we are now living. The end. Thank you for watching.